Every year, we honor our deceased heroes Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, Nat Turner, and of course, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King is given the highest honor with a federal holiday. He's given this honor because his ideology of peaceful protest is being deliberately amplified to be the template and standard model of protest that a white establishment wants all Black people to follow. In other words, he's been exalted the highest because his ideology benefits the system of white supremacy. Many African Americans naively believe that the King holiday is for us. That never was the case. His peaceful ideology is what's actually being celebrated to keep the Black masses peaceful. It's actually, as Neely Fuller Jr. said, if you don't understand the system of white supremacy, then everything they do will only confuse you. I digress. Returning to the subject about our deceased Black heroes. Every year, we honor our fallen heroes, our Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, Nat Turner, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have a question, a rhetorical question. How do you think these heroes would respond if they could see our collective state today? What would Harriet Tubman say upon seeing Black women today that were the most dignified women in the U.S., now twerking, calling themselves bitches and hoes, and believing that being promiscuous is a form of female empowerment? How would Dr. King respond today, given that he led the largest unified Black protest in U.S. history, now finding us more divided than any previous time in U.S. history? How would Malcolm X respond, given that when he was assassinated, African Americans were wearing afros, calling ourselves brothers and sisters, and we call our racist oppressors crackers? Today we're wearing weaves, calling ourselves bitches and hoes, and we're calling them white people. Clearly we're respecting ourselves lesser and respecting them more. What would Rosa Parks, who refused to sit at the rear of the bus, say when seeing Black people whose mindsets compelled them to sit at the back of the bus? What would Frederick Douglass, who always declared that we are not niggers, but are instead a dignified people worthy of respect, what would he think today when witnessing African American men insisting on calling themselves niggers and so undignifiedly sagging their pants below their asses? I sincerely believe, given that millions of us have become everything that these leaders, our heroes, stood against, more specifically that we've become the internal narratives of the racist white society, that largely these heroes would distraughtly cry. That's correct. Every year we celebrate our Black heroes who would cry if they could see us today. And many of us have normalized this disheartening fact. To truly honor our heroes, we must learn how the behaviors amongst many of us have become aligned with the racist narrative of the white society. We must then develop ways to overcome it. These noted profound changes within the African American culture that clearly benefits the system of white supremacy were all created by deliberate design. White social scientists fundamentally changed the African American culture in ways that best facilitates the white establishment ongoing subjugation of Black people. The history and reason. The 1960s was the most turbulent decade within America's history. White America's blatant racist mistreatment of African Americans had ran its course and resulted in unprecedented unified Black protests that eroded the nation's stability and global image. The unified strategies implemented by African Americans against the U.S. system of white supremacy during the 1960s was unprecedented and remains today still unrivaled by any other minority group in U.S. history. In response to that decade's unprecedented Black protests, white oppressive forces around 1968 to 69 began deploying an ideological subversion system against African Americans. Ideological subversion is an offensive psychological warfare tool that uses disinformation and misinformation as a weapon to manipulate targeted populations to think and behave in ways that are against their own self-interest. The purpose is to attack the targeted population at the psychological level in a bid to destabilize and undermine their entire culture. The goal is to spread so much disinformation into the Black community until virtually everything believed by the Black population are lies that hinders our liberation. It confuses the Black population to such an extent that despite an abundance of information, no one is able to come to any sensible conclusion in the interest of defending ourselves, defending our communities, and ultimately liberating ourselves. The ultimate goal is the complete collapse of the Black population. Although the government portrays itself publicly as a democracy wherein which all citizens are equal, in reality it has always been secretly committed to the preservation of its nation's white dominance over its Black population. This unrelenting commitment necessitated that something had to be done to restore the nation's stability and to subdue and stifle African Americans' growing momentum in our demand for equality. If the government did not create a system that impeded Black advancement, it would then be diametrically opposing its own self-interest of preserving its nation's white dominance over Blacks. Therefore, to remedy what was then called the Negro problem, in 1967, President Lyndon Johnson put together a committee called the Kerner Commission. Their assignment was to study the Negro problem, find the cause of the problem, and then develop solutions. The details. In 1968, white social scientists hired by the Kerner Commission determined that an aggravating core factor for that decade's unprecedented unified Black protests was caused by an elevated and unifying Black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. They also learned then that while the oppressors, through their weaponry advantage of guns and cannons, can brutally invade and enslave Black people, they, however, cannot win our loyalty or sustain peace with us indefinitely unless our minds have been manipulated to think in ways that prevent us from unifying against the white oppressive society. Because what they learn is that whenever people are oppressed for long durations, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors will continue to grow until it reaches a boiling point, resulting in massive acts of rebellion against their oppressors. The oppressed always eventually rebels against their oppressors. This is an inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are being oppressed for long periods. This is what was actually happening among African Americans during the 1960s. White racism had reached a boiling point within the collective minds of African Americans, which resulted in that decade's unprecedented unified Black protests. Those white social scientists largely determined that they could subdue unified Black protests by deploying an ideological subversion system that keeps the collective self-esteem of the Black masses very low, and that shifts our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it towards ourselves. They achieve both of these objectives by deploying a propaganda campaign that keeps Black people believing the fraudulent worst about themselves. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of Black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It's actually an insidious Black racially demoralizing divide and rule psychological warfare campaign. Demoralized divide and rule is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. It's a well-documented and well-proven social science tactic used for controlling large targeted populations. The white ruling class secretly uses it to control the Black population. And it's so obvious that it's only by not critically thinking that it cannot be seen. When critically thinking, can't you see just how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is? That all narratives that Black people receive about ourselves from the white society are consistently negative? That's cartoonishly unrealistic. It's a Black racially demoralizing psychological warfare campaign being deployed against us. This is not some silly conspiracy theory. It's the truth that they hide from us. Throughout world history, oppressors have often deployed demoralizing, divide, and conquer tactics against the oppressed because Creating self-loathing and division amongst the oppressed makes the oppressed much easier to control and subjugate. This nefarious practice was never abandoned. It's the warfare tactic that white oppressive forces presently deploys against black people. This demoralizing divide warfare system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the black population without being challenged nor counterbalanced by any equal amount of black positive racially affirming information. It conveys a subliminal message that black people are our own worst enemies and therefore we need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied subliminal propaganda programming, especially when the programming is being told daily and so unrelentingly. This system works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that those messages negatively affects the black population in terms of our behaviors. With time, being unable to refute the constant negative information being told about us, many black people eventually comes to accept it. We internalize it. The constant humiliation influences how we perceive ourselves, creating division and self-hatred among us. And it shifts black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. We can then be ruled over forever. Through the skillful, sustained use of repetitive media subliminal propaganda programming, white oppressive forces have created a prison for the minds of black people. Those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental change. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an implied objective. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most black people will act accordingly to the information because they've all been given the same disinformation about ourselves. This psychological warfare system provides white oppressive forces with a more proficient and covert method for controlling and subjugating black people. For unlike the past blatant racist systems that black people were easily able to identify and therefore develop counter strategies against, this system is not easily recognized nor is it easily comprehended by its black victims. This psychological warfare program works so well, in fact, that it not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in fact, in many cases, makes many black people prefer it. It is at the root of both the profound division and self-hatred now afflicting many black people. Sadly, to our detriment, the oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. Frantz Fanon said that, and it's so true. White social scientists also use media social engineering to negatively steer the black culture. The narrative that we African Americans made the N-word ours and that using it now empowers us are lies created by white propagandists to keep us from learning the truth. Those false narratives are believed and are repeated by those of us that are ignorant. Ignorant, naive, and gullible. These are always the group that are the easiest victim of the white society's fraudulent propaganda campaigns. It was actually white oppressive forces that socialized us to self-identify ourselves as niggers. Because in order to subjugate and control a targeted population, the first step is to neutralize their alpha males, aka those possessing warrior spirits. These are those males who are psychologically wired to protect their communities and their women. White social scientists neutralized the black alpha male among African Americans by social engineering us to self-identify ourselves as niggers. They did this to us because words have cast spell over the subconscious mind. Words, when repeated often enough, have immense power over the subconscious mind. Repeated words shapes our thoughts, and our thoughts, when held long enough, becomes a belief. A belief then becomes your biology. We psychologically become the words we repeatedly call ourselves. It's why men that call themselves thugs are more likely to engage in a fight than to avoid one. It's also why women that proclaim themselves as being bitches often become stubbornly unreasonable. We become what we call ourselves. Words put a spell upon our subconscious mind. We function based upon the words we assign ourselves. This is also the reason why 90% of black men that are sagging their pants below their asses are the same ones that self-identify as niggers. They sag because they think that's how niggas are supposed to dress. Words, when repeated often enough, place a psychological spell upon our subconscious mind. It's a psychological phenomenon that white oppressive forces, white social scientists, have thoroughly studied. When we repeatedly call ourselves niggers, this conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false inherent subordinate identity that makes us less likely to stand up against the white society, therefore aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over black people. When we call ourselves niggers, we also separate ourselves from our unifying African culture. Without having a identity to connect us to as a people, over time we become further fragmented and become weaker as a people. We can then be made into anything the white oppressors wants us to be. Self-identifying ourselves as niggers also psychologically divides us from Native Africans. When Africans are divided globally, we lose our global numerical advantage and lose all hopes of defeating global white supremacy. We also treat each other based upon the words we call each other. When we call each other niggers, we are dehumanizing each other, which makes it easier to mistreat each other. This is a fact that the military has known for a very long time. Case, point, and proof. During the Vietnam War, to ease the American soldiers' anxieties about torturing and killing the Vietnamese soldiers, they were taught to refer to them as Chinks, Gooks, Kongs. This dehumanized them in the minds of the soldiers and made it easier to kill and torture them. Case, point, and proof. Have you ever closely listened to it whenever a black person speaks of a previous fight against another black person? He will say that the details that I kicked that nigger's ass, I slapped that nigger this, I shot that nigger. The word nigger is being used as a replacement. It's being used to dehumanize the person. If you then ask the speaker to retell the details of the story, now I'm calling the person black person, rather than the word nigger, or call a person my brother. It will then become psychologically difficult. The person will be struggling to tell the story. The more brutal that his behavior were, the more difficult it is to tell the story without dehumanizing the victim. The person may even become angry at you and say, oh, I don't want to tell the story anymore, because he's not able to dehumanize the person. When we assign negative words upon someone, we dehumanize them, which makes it easier to mistreat them. This is also why they socialize and call themselves niggers. This is also why men who refer to women as bitches and hoes have a higher tendency to mistreat women. These noted factors are the reason why white oppressive forces socially engineered millions of African Americans to self-identify ourselves as niggers. We are more susceptible to negative social engineering because we were stripped of our true identity and culture during the enslavement of our ancestors. That's why we're more susceptible to it. That's why they haven't been able to so successfully condition Africans to call themselves niggers. You know, this was achieved through media social engineering. Most people naively believe that the media reflects our reality. But in truth, it's more often we that imitates what we see and learn from the media. A group's identity is greatly shaped by how they repeatedly see themselves depicted in the media. People often become those derogatory media depictions of themselves that they've accepted as being their reality. Therefore, whoever controls the people's media images literally controls their culture. It's a true social science known as media social engineering. This is not some feeble-minded premise. Media social engineering is a real and well-crafted system that allows the white ruling class to control the masses and to steer targeted population. The white ruling class is using it to negatively steer the African American culture. When these white social scientists create trends and customs for black youths to imitate, they deliberately create those that gets our black youths acting and dressing as caricatures that reinforces resentment and anti-black sentiments against us. Moreover, those images that reinforces many negative racist stereotypes about black people. Black youths becomes the caricatures and derogatory images and stereotypes about us that they've accepted as being their reality. The white media has always represented a tyranny of the white society's control over black people. The true reason why we self-identify as niggers is a testament of white media social engineering. White oppressive forces secretly perceives black rappers as useful idiots. In addition to making lots of money by exploiting them, they use them to negatively stare at the black culture. They also uses them to vilify and criminalize our image, which makes the white society's justice system's mistreatment of us appears always justifiable, because now we are the face of crime. Now, although the nigger terminology is being programmed into our minds through the hip hop music industry, that industry merely reinforces an earlier programming. The nigger terminology was originally indoctrinated into the African American culture during the 1960s through the black exploitation film. It was originally done using the movie industry to black exploitation films. Black exploitation is a term coined in the early 1970s to refer to black films that were aimed at black audiences. It was those black exploitation films that first conditioned African Americans on a national level that it was cool and trendy, a term of endearment, to call ourselves niggers. In those films, written, directed, and produced by white companies, white people, black actors were hired to shuck and jive and repeatedly call themselves niggers. Niggers, bitch, hoes, thugs. Many black people went to those movies. Those movies were enjoyable because they provided black heroes on the screen like we've never had before. They provided us with heroes we've never seen on the big silver screen. However, with those caricatures, they brought those negative stereotypes, and many black people, young, start adopting it. So you come home and you're calling yourself a nigger, and your grandmom says, "Why are you calling yourself nigger?" And they said, "Grandma, you don't understand. That's our word. We call ourselves niggers now." Ignorant. No, it was through media social engineering that we were made to call ourselves niggers. We have to recognize that there's a war being waged against us. And we have to wake up to our reality. We have to wake up to our reality. Our so-called leaders are not going to do anything because they're not true leaders. They actually work for the white establishment. We have to wake up to our truth. One love and peace.